Broadcasting from atop a national monument in Rapid City, South Dakota, it is the Mount Rushmore podcast. Woohoo! Oh, yeah! Woohoo! And the reason we sound like morning drive time disc jockeys is because we're talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's right, I'm here.
I'm in the traffic copter.
He's in the traffic copter. That's right.
I'm trying to.
That's my good friend Michael.
Howdy.
And down on the scene of the giveaway outside the music store with the tickets to the concert is Richard.
All right, we're giving out tickets to the first 12 callers who can answer this question about Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
All
God,
right.
I hate this episode.
I hate us already. I hate us already. So, in case you didn't know by the completely improvised, unscripted opening that we just did, our topic this episode is the Mount Rushmore of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Snubs, which was chosen by Richard for what reason?
Well, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies are coming up, I think, this week? Question mark, but I think that's right.
I think it's kind of a yes. It is this week, but I think it's also like I wish it was a surprise. I think they should just gather all rock bands together in one room, and then let's see who's gonna get on stage. And
Like
go
the
in.
Oscars? Kind of like that?
Little bit, but
Yeah.
like all of them.
And the nominees are Modest Mouse and Anya and Aerosmith
Let's see
and
who it's gonna
AC/DC.
be. And I've always been fascinated with the concept of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I love the idea. The implementation is sometimes a little dicey.
Yeah.
Although they got a lot of stuff right this year. They got The Cure going in.
Hell yeah.
They got Roxy Music going in. So
Great.
they righted some wrongs here, but there's plenty of wrongs still to right.
Yeah.
We're going to do that. I love the idea that
We're doing that.
We're doing it. We're writing them.
writing them right here.
I hope I hope this podcast goes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I'll send it to them and see what happens.
We overdubbed a better podcast over.
I love the idea that, like, unlike a sports Hall of Fame where you can have debates because, this guy hit 320, but he only had 112 home runs, and you can have all this different like stats and factual based debate. This is just primarily your opinion, man.
Yeah. It seems.
Oh, it's not based on Billboard or
No. It's not really based on that. I mean, their actual, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, their
selection
process, and what the criteria that they use. They include like influences. How influential were you? How important was your music? I mean, to some extent, yes, popularity matters. I mean, Bon Jovi's in the freaking Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so.
Roxy Music impacted shoulder pad sales for many years afterwards.
And boas.
I believe.
But, so I'm just sort of I'm interested in it from that standpoint. And this is not here are my 4 favorite bands who aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Sure.
I didn't really go that route.
Oh, I kind of did.
That's fine. Because there are a lot of bands that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that I agree deserve to be there, but I don't like. Like, I don't like the Doors. We've established this quite vociferously on the podcast in the past. They absolutely deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for what they meant for their era and how influential they were. So I would argue they deserve to be in there, but you're not going to catch me listening to Doors songs.
I've always found the idea of any sort of Hall of Fame just kind of weird. Like with sports, like you said, it's based on statistics and it's based on impact of the game and titles won in whatever various sport. But at the same time, it's like voted on by like writers, and they, ultimately they decide, well, this person may have been on PEDs, and so they're never allowed to go in. And it's just like, and then they kind of drop it for some people. It depends on their persona. It depends on kind of their quote off the field behavior. You don't really have that with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're like a true rock and roller has bad off the stage acts that they've done.
They don't have to be role models.
It is purely based on did they make good music?
Did they rock your face?
But also I think what's strange about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is the length of time that they put in to say, you have to wait a quarter of a century for us to even consider you, which is a long time. Like other sports Hall of Fames, it's like 5 years.
Oh.
It's like your career's done. We can review what you've done in that shorter period of time. But with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's like we need to wait until
You're almost dead.
Yeah, like 25 years is a long time to evaluate a career.
Yeah.
When I think some of my choices, I think are very obvious. They've all made big impacts, and they made a big impact immediately. And you got to wait a quarter of a century to be like, now you're deserving.
I would also imagine the artist who could profit from the accolade would not want to wait 25 years either if there was some kind of residual that they get a victory lap tour that they get to go on or something like
That's
that.
pretty much Cheap Trick.
That's cheap.
Cheap Trick
Yeah.
pretty much is living on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were inducted a couple of years ago.
You know,
And they like campaigned for it. They're one of the few bands that I've really seen that were
I got
really
the mailer.
craven about it. Yeah.
I saw the skywriting.
Oh, you did? Good.
You know, and that does make me think of one thing, though, is that when you are making music, when one is young, you're a bit more idealized in thought. You are a bit more maybe punk rock. If someone 5 years later was to say, hey, I'm in Cleveland and I want to put you in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I'm sure there would be a lot more middle fingers and I don't need this corporate bullshit. You add 25 years to kind of mellow out and be like, yeah, man, I'm here with the Beatles, or I'm here with Eric Clapton, and I'm sure the Ramones are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yes.
But would the Ramones be in if they were voted in 1982?
Yeah.
If it was like such a, it didn't exist. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame didn't exist until what, 85, 86, something like that.
I didn't do any research.
I did a little bit.
Okay.
But like,
Good job, guys.
But like, it didn't like that level of being within the scene. I'm sure would have prevented them from being like, oh, I'm okay with being recognized.
Yeah. All right. Richard chose it. Michael, kick it off.
9 Inch Nails.
All right.
Who it's not like they have a long period of having been snubbed. It's something like 5 years. Their eligibility was like 5 years ago. Their first album was Pretty Hate Machine in 1989.
Also on my list, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
All right.
And so, but they have been, I say they, it's Trent Reznor plus a cadre.
Atticus, what's his name?
Oh, Atticus Ross.
Yeah.
It's basically Trent Reznor and him plus some people who have toured with him are 9 Inch Nails. It's him recording everything in his studio. But I think that he had such an interesting voice from the get-go and continued to kind of push music forward from a certain point of view in terms of sampling, in terms of layering. There wouldn't be, I don't think, maybe you could argue that like a band like Kraftwerk was more influential, but like the way that the sound that he pushed at the time in 89 and even forward into the early 90s, it didn't sound like anything else. It's not like the big grunge movement that came out of the early 90s sounded anything like 9 Inch Nails. But 9 Inch Nails was played alongside Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Weezer. Like you could hear that with the other bigger names of that time. And, he's continued to make music for the past 30 years, scores.
Right.
He is a prolific musician, and I don't know what the process. I don't know why they wouldn't have voted him in. It's strange.
I don't know. Maybe he's somebody just rubbed some people the wrong way. The actual selection committee is like this mix of musicians plus rock
Critics.
journalists and critics and what have you. So I don't really know the specifics behind that. Don't know. What I have down on them is basically they may not have been the first industrial band.
Yeah.
But they were the one that broke through, like you said.
Yeah.
Ministry, incredibly foundationally important. But we're never, and it had a couple of like songs that crossed over a little bit, but they weren't on MTV 24 hours a day like 9 Inch Nails was at their peak. They never broke through on K-Rock here in Los Angeles. Or they weren't a band that most people who are just sort of average music fans know. If you know an industrial band, you know 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah, Trent was being interviewed on a Soundtrack podcast about his work on The Social Network, and when I think about the era in which Zuckerberg was probably cooking up Facebook, which is portrayed in that film. I think of Nine Inch Nails as something that would have been cranking on college campuses still at that time and still relevant to young people. So in a way, it almost felt like his music, his album music was a soundtrack for that era, and now his kind of industrial score is a soundtrack for that movie that's about that era. And it also speaks to some of the seething, insidious stuff that is sitting beneath the edge while here this person is putting together an application that's supposed to bring people together and connect people. Yeah, there's a very divisive music that's going on.
And without like Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor, you wouldn't have Marilyn Manson, and then you wouldn't have like all the talk shows that had all the kids on that were the Jenny Joneses of the world.
All the Marilyn
and
Manson.
all of the Marilyn Manson kids coming on, all the different people dressed up in the makeovers.
Yeah. Today we have a goat. It's goth. Oh, sorry, I messed it up. Today we have a goat.
So what you're suggesting is that you can draw a straight line from Nine Inch Nails to Insane Clown Posse? I'm starting to rethink my choice right now. Maybe
they were right.
Let's see when Insane Clown Posse's first album is.
Yeah, let's see if they're eligible and then see what happens.
Okay, so we both chose Nine Inch Nails. Richard's second choice is
a band that Michael mentioned, Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk,
the fathers of electronic music.
Krautrock.
The German Krautrock superstars. You really wouldn't have had new wave or industrial or electro dance or probably even hip hop. I mean, Africa Bambaataa sampled Kraftwerk very early on in their careers. You wouldn't have had any sort of electronic based music.
Yeah,
you can draw a direct line to Kraftwerk.
Do you think they're a band that isn't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Do you think because it's like, you must pronounce it Kraftwerk, and then everyone's like, it's Kraftwerk, and they're like, we do not accept.
We will not come into the Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. So they had this real robot pop type of sensibility to them. I owned a couple of albums growing up. Audubon. I had Tour de France was another one, which is a little bit more commercially oriented. But they had a presentation as well. They're very much of a pace of a Devo.
Yeah.
Where the presentation of what they had was, I think, as important as the music.
You see Daft Punk being not the first people to act and dress like.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much anymore, and pretty much, Kraftwerk has they had mannequins to do all their like photo shoots and everything like that. I mean, it was a very much a conceptualized thing. They made their own instruments and synthesizers and vocoders and things like that. I know I can't remember, there's like two main guys, and one of them talked about how it was hard for them to tour in the United States because they tried to bring all these homemade instruments over and they couldn't get them through customs because people thought they were like bombs and bomb-making devices and things like that. But the whole idea of having these simple melodies and these sort of rhythms that kind of repeat for 9-10 minutes in a row, that's something that you mentioned Daft Punk. I mean, I could just go through a list of bands, and they were never commercially successful. Yeah. But when I think about being influential, in their time, and then these bands today, these were albums that came out in the 70s that still today, mention them as an influence, and the bands that they influenced them. It's just super foundational. And part of me with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame says, can you tell the story of rock and roll without talking about this band? And I think it would be hard to tell a really detailed story of rock, especially where we're at today with electronic music being so big without
I thought about this in the opening, and that is what always bothered me about rock and roll as a label is it is purposefully expansive because it's always fighting off other genres.
Right.
Like if you would have said rock and roll and hip hop were going to be sharing any artists in their Hall of Fame, 20 years ago, I would say you're wrong because that's not what rock and roll is to these people.
Right.
So I think it's right now rock and roll. I think it's described as kind of like young people's music or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's whatever young people were listening to at the time.
That's not
probably.
country.
That's not
Or
country. Even though there
classic,
are
yeah.
country acts
Yeah,
that are,
yeah.
And there, I mean, Janet Jackson is being inducted this year, and I was listening. Sirius has a rock and roll Hall of Fame station, so some Janet Jackson songs came up, and I was like, "Whoa!" Those are really good. I'd forgotten how good Janet Jackson was, and then B, there were a lot of rock elements to those, like Nasty and
Rhythm
all that
Nation
stuff.
1814 was like there's a lot of like electric guitar
Yeah,
on
so
like a kind of pop R&B ish
So what
crossover album.
What do you call that? Is that
Yeah.
rock and roll? Is it not? I don't.
I guess
you kind of have to throw your hands up at
if
that one.
yeah. Well, what is interesting is you mentioned Nine Inch Nails as your first choice, and then Kraftwerk, and I think of Gary Newman when I was a kid was the first thing that was like new wave or punk that I could kind of wrap my brain around.
Right.
And he just performed on stage doing Cars with Nine Inch Nails. So I don't know if he was kind of a through line for them.
I think that he was definitely influenced by Kraftwerk. Fun fact about Cars, that was actually the song that Prince and the Revolution used to play as their warm-up song.
Oh, is that right?
Or like they're doing sound checks and stuff like that.
That is hard to believe.
Yeah, there you go.
It's funny you mentioned like through lines, and you look at like the first list of the first artists that were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and it just reads as like pure rock and roll. It's Elvis Presley, it's Jerry Lee Lewis, it's
Like the Beatles.
they were like a year.
They weren't eligible for
They
a year,
weren't
right?
eligible.
Wow.
Which is also one of those weird, like, someone made a weird technicality and then they didn't really plan the timing of it. And it's like, oh, the Beatles aren't on here? And like, oh no, man, that was 1963 or whatever. It just missed the cut by 1 year. So like the Beatles and like a bunch of
Rolling
others.
Stones
Yeah, a
were
bunch
like
of others were
37
like, it was just
or
like,
something.
this is a dumb
Mm-hmm.
thought process.
Yeah.
But I guess the point is that I think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame really started out as very traditional rock and roll, and as music has changed, I think it has enveloped other styles and genres and like rap and hip hop, and I don't know if there's any like major country. I'm sure there are major country stars that are also in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I know
too.
Johnny Cash is.
Mm-hmm.
I believe.
It's so. The one thing that we're off on a tangent. The one thing that bothers me about like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is like when people are inducted for 3 different things.
Oh,
It's like when you're in there with like one band and then you're in there as a solo artist.
Oh, I
Yeah.
hate that.
It's like,
Like
man,
Neil Young's in there, I think 3 times.
if you're in there, aren't you just in there?
you're just
like,
in there. Yeah.
It's weird.
Thank God
Yeah.
Ringo's in there as solo artist. By the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Well, that's funny. What the posture is. What's interesting is I learned at one point that what makes an antique is anything that's 25 years or older. So in a way, it's just this kind of antique music, or it's things that were formerly against an establishment, and now unfortunately the establishment has embraced them entirely.
Good rule of thumb. You'll know when you're old when the artist you were listening to is a kid or a teenager are now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Good rule of thumb.
Good rule of thumb. Okay, so Michael's second.
My second is I was looking it up, and like on a technicality on my list, she had the longest years of being snubbed at 17.
Susan Lucci.
Susan Lucci. Bjork.
Oh, wow.
Because she put out an album when she was 11.
Oh,
And I
okay.
guess technically that would count. It was an album of like covers and kind of other traditional Icelandic songs.
On the tail of her child performer fame.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Had she come out of her chrysalis by that point? 'Cause I assume that's how she was born, not actually.
on stage she had to
The
hack
swan
herself
hadn't
out.
hatched.
Yeah. But like ultimately her, she was in the Sugar Cubes for a few years, in the late 80s. But her like solo debut would also still count.
Oh.
Like from 1993, which is over 25 years. It would just I would expect that she'd be someone that would be that they'd put in the next few years, just because she is an interesting iconic sort of performer and singer, and she just like her first 3 or 4 albums were just like all amazing. I think she kind of tailed off. I think she had a real downturn after she did that one Lars von Trier movie,
Dancer in the Dark.
Was it Lars von
Waves?
Trier?
Yes.
Where she was just like, it like destroyed her emotionally, and like her music kind of changed after that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, she's just a fascinating singer, fascinating performer, very visual. A lot of my artists on here are also very visual. I mean, Kraftwerk as well.
Yeah.
All very of an MTV sort of era where it wasn't just the music, it was the images that went along with it. And Bjork is a singer that, you know, she's probably the most famous Icelandic person in the world.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It doesn't feel like a major snub if you don't include her first album. It's like, it's kind of like I don't know. That feels a little weird, but it's like it's right on the edge for me. Like, I could understand why she wouldn't be in there, but like, it's like I would expect in the next few years, if we kind of come back to this and re-record this, we're not going to do that, everybody. Don't worry about it. I don't know. I find her a unique voice, especially, and would be a unique person and unique music sensibility in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Like, whatever wall that they put up that includes these people. I've never been. Have you guys ever been?
No.
No, I've never been to Cleveland.
Like, I don't know what it's like inside if you just walk along is there like a statue of her? Is there a bust? Is there just a wall?
I think it was a Ben and
here's
Jerry's ice cream, and then they just turned it into a rock. You get
flavor.
There's still like some cones and things sitting around. Some sprinkles
over around the.
I do wonder.
Little Richard exhibit.
It is funny though, because like, do people wish it wasn't in Cleveland? Do people wonder like why not Detroit? Why not?
Yeah.
You know, New York. Why not Chicago? Why not somewhere else? Right now, or Alabama, or Memphis, or next to Sun
Feels like
Records.
there was some sort of corporate or some sort of like civic skullduggery that went on. Some bribes were passed out to get it in Cleveland.
Yeah. Bribes. It's we're not beneath it. We're gonna pay you a big hug if you go on to iTunes, go on to Stitcher, go on to iHeartRadio, download, rate, and review previous episodes. Don't snub us.
Yeah, hey, we're on Spotify.
We're on Spotify.
So listen to these acts.
That's right.
Then listen to us.
Yeah.
Although if you're already listening to us, fuck it, just listen.
Just keep listening. Listen to some Bjork, listen to some Trent, some Kraftwerk, and listen to some Mount Rushmore podcast, and then rate and review. We'd appreciate it, and share it with your friends. And then join us in a dialogue on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Let us know what topics you'd like to hear us address. Then voice your opinion about previous episodes if you'd like. Suggest a new episode. Previous suggestors of episodes have ended up being on our podcast. That certainly could be you if you were interested. And we would appreciate that. And we'd appreciate you supporting podcasting in general. You probably are since you're listening to this. But here's a podcast that we love.
You've heard others, but nothing could prepare you for the shameful stupidity that is the Jock and Nerd Podcast. Witness the hubris as they claim to be the world's authority on comic book movies.
Who said that?
Never said that. We've never said that.
Who cares? A jock said that.
Comic book, TV, movie reviews, news, and whatever they choose. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. The Jock and Nerd Podcast. Seriously, people really listen to this.
Jock and Nerd.
And we is back. Next episode. Speaking of, rock and roll people often have big hair. Our next episode is going to be the Mount Rushmore of big hair. So if you've liked this episode, tune in 1 week from today. You got to wait a week. I'm sorry. Unless
you pay us enough to actually come to your house.
Yeah.
And do an episode.
Well,
which we will do.
Our Patreon is we actually come to your house.
Yeah.
Record
hang out
it
for a while.
And then
You know what?
you pay us more.
Then we don't leave.
You pay us more and we
Whether
leave.
you're there or not, we'll bring in your mail. Junius to feed the cat.
Yeah.
Basically, in this gig economy, we are so desperate.
We're so desperate.
Need a ride to the airport?
We, like Bjork, are driving Uber on the side.
And I expect a lot of commentary about this episode.
Yeah.
This one in particular, I feel like there should be a lot of debate about it on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
On our social media. Also, if you want me to debate you about whether or not Green Day should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I am more than happy to yell at you for 20 minutes about why they shouldn't be in there.
Okay.
So just so you know.
All right. Mike Cole has let us know his second. Richard will start with his third.
All right. So my third choice are the Pixies.
Okay.
So if Kraftwerk are the fathers of electronic music, then the Pixies are probably the fathers and mother of indie rock. They basically invented the whole I don't want to say they invented it, but they
went down to the lab, drew up a bunch of equations.
I think it was on Dexter's Laboratory, actually. I'm thinking of an episode of that. The whole loud, quiet, loud sound dynamic, which is something that Nirvana, I mean, Kurt Cobain was very open about, like, yeah, we basically, that was what we took for our sound. Yeah, that whole concept. Again, another band that wasn't hugely commercially successful in their time, but in terms of, it's sort of like that. There's the Velvet Underground, where it's like, they only sold 20,000 records, but every band or every person who bought it started a band. I feel the same way about the Pixies. You listen to what happened to alternative music in the 90s through today, and you can hear that Pixies influence so much in that. I mean, those first 4 albums they had they're just great all the way through. And they, unlike, I think, so much music of that era, which can sound kind of dated. I mean, you listen to grunge, for example, and to me, I think there's a little bit of a dated element to it. I don't get that with the Pixies. I feel like that you could release, Monkey Gone to Heaven on rock radio today and would probably find a place. It'd probably find more of a place today than it did, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you feel like influence is always important? Like if somebody was the first at something like Friendster, but then didn't take it to its logical conclusion or didn't do as much with it, is that still important?
If you had a social media hall of fame or a website hall, I don't know, whatever you want to call it,
yeah,
Friendster type thing, yeah, I think so. I think that would you have had a Facebook if you didn't have, LiveJournal?
Yeah.
I don't know, probably not. So in that context, yes, I don't think you can tell the story of social media. It doesn't just start with Facebook.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be able to tell that story with these things that came before it, even if there are things like MySpace or LiveJournal or what have you that eventually faded and are in obscurity now.
Okay.
But I'm a big believer in being influential within your time frame. I mean, the Pixies were a beloved band. They were like Bowie's favorite band in the 80s and 90s. He appeared in documentaries talking about this.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, being influential in your time, but then also being influential after your time. And I think that's partially why they wait so long to induct bands.
Yeah, maybe.
Because you don't really know how influential a band is going to be until you've got some time to sort of see how their music wears over time. I mean, Bay City Rollers probably would have been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame if you just took a snapshot of 1978 or something like that.
How many albums did the Pixies put out?
3, not
4?
counting the new ones.
Yeah.
I think it's like 5.
Okay.
So they didn't put out a ton. I mean, they had about a 7 or 8 year run, because I know they took some time off in the late 80s when they were starting to fall apart. Then they came back together. So
I think you and I are really synced up in terms of how we think about these people that should go in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or that aren't in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right.
Because my third choice, I'm going to just jump in right now, the Smiths are very much along the same influence type track line as the Pixies, except for
Britain.
Except for kind of indie rock in Britain and Britpop. Everyone that came after them was like, oh yeah, well, we are just huge fans of the Smiths.
Yeah.
They influenced everything we did, whether it was like a band like Oasis or Blur, or you jump ahead to America and a band like the Decemberists, very specifically, like Colin Malloy, and like just the songwriting and the lyrics of like Morrissey and Marr were just so different from everything else. And I think they too had such a short shelf life. They were only around from like 83 or 84 till 87. Although they were like a big singles band. They were like one of those bands that were around within like the British music system, where like they always had to have a single out. So they put out a lot of like singles and
Yeah.
singles with B-sides. Those were like, that was the most important thing, is there was always like a single coming out. But I think that, and they never had like the huge American crossover thing either. They're very concentrated, very beloved within their own thing. And I think that kind of builds into like the myth making of a band. You know, I think the only time you'll see the Smiths get back together is if they were eventually inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Although I even doubt, I wonder if Morrissey would even show up for
He doesn't
that.
show
He's
up to
kind
his
of an
own
a-hole.
shows now.
Exactly.
That's right. I don't know. I think that they are just, I listen to a lot of British music and just so influential within that. And, you know, the Pixies are probably just hand in hand on how much they influence some other.
Let me ask you this. We mentioned The Cure finally being inducted this year, which I think was a long overdue oversight. And if they would not have been on this year, they probably would have made my list. Which do you think that they should have gone in before the Smiths?
They're so different.
Because I know you're a big fan of both bands.
Their music is so vastly different. Robert Smith is just such a weird guy, not looks wise, but just in terms of, he's like this weird, like, kind of rock and roll rock god, very pure in that sense. But I don't know. They've had such a long career as a band. Like, they've had such a weird long legacy.
They're the band that they're the version of the hitter that gets like 3,000 hits because they've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, we saw them a couple years ago at the Hollywood Bowl, and they still put on like 3-hour concerts.
Yeah,
and like they're just perfect. They sound perfect. I don't know, but I don't think that the Cure. I'm couching it within the terms of like being influential. I don't think the Cure was as influential as the Smiths.
It's interesting. I thought along those same lines. It's like I think they're both influential. Probably the Smiths more so.
Yeah.
But certainly the Cure were more commercially successful.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, they were probably had more chances to be influential. Just
Yeah,
because
very bombastic. Had a lot more.
People in kids in Middle America listened to Disintegration when they never probably did. Who never probably listened to the Smiths, or if they did, it was probably because they started out down the path by listening to
speaking of,
Disintegration.
as a representative of Middle America,
tell
the
us, Kansas boy.
the Cure I heard in senior year of high school, and the Smiths I didn't hear till college. So, yeah.
Senior year of high school, what year was that?
87. 86, 87, yeah.
86, 87. So it was before Disintegration. That was Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me era.
Yeah.
You were listening to Why Can't I Be You?
Mm-hmm.
That was...
There was this also, I forget what year there was a death myth or a death hoax for Robert W. Smith, too. I just remember Tabitha Soren or somebody on MTV talking about the rumor that Robert W. Smith has died, too. I don't remember anything like that for Morrissey breaking through in the U.S.
I will tell you this. If you get a chance, go on YouTube, and I'll try to post this on social media this week. There is a video of when Morrissey was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen this?
Well, yeah, when he's... I've actually been listening to a Tonight Show podcast, and they talk about trying to keep fans of certain artists out of the studio because they're afraid they'll disrupt the rest of the show,
And
which
that's
is
what happened with
yeah.
Morrissey. He basically, his fans just basically turned it into Ed Sullivan Beatles, and just wouldn't. Bill Cosby was the main guest.
Yeah.
Ironic, but looking back on it now, but him and Johnny Carson spent their whole time ripping on Morrissey fans because they were just being so loud and just wanting Morrissey to.
If you lined up outside, which the Smiths fans did, you'd be the ones to get in that night. And so a guy like Cosby or somebody who does this comedy routine that normally kills among your average Americans is dying on stage.
Yeah, it was like literally the worst choice you could have possibly had for your main guest with Morrissey.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure, since I would assume Jell-O Pops are vegan. Maybe. There's dairy, probably. No good.
Okay, cool choice. Okay, Richard.
All right, my last choice is if Kraftwerk were the fathers of electronic music and the Pixies were the fathers of indie rock, and Nine Inch Nails were the fathers of industrial rock.
A lot of dads here.
Well, that's dad rock. Then probably the fathers of modern heavy metal were Judas Priest. I think even more so than a band like Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin. I think you can really take a look at British Steel and some of those from that album on, their 80s output especially. Everything that they had visually, musically, I would argue is probably more influential to what we consider to be heavy metal today than a lot of these other bands. Sabbath's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Zeppelin's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and absolutely they were foundational. But Judas Priest, you've got Rob Halford, you've got just the way he looked, the kind of metal and studs and leather, and picture a metal band in your head. They look like Judas Priest. And musically, you got Rob Halford with this like operatic type voice, which means he actually had singing ability, which kind of set them apart from a lot of other metal bands of their time. And you've got like this dual guitar attack and these driving but melodic sort of melodies. You just see their influence on everything from Van Halen to Metallica, and they put out some great music. I'm not a heavy metal person necessarily, but I can appreciate the hell out of Judas Priest.
I'm sure this is a good choice. I cannot name off the top of my head a Judas Priest song. I'm sure if you played something for me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know that. But it's funny how some bands that just happen to somehow not fill that sort of, like, I don't know. I didn't grow up listening to heavy metal.
Sure.
But always knew the name Judas Priest.
Yeah, and you would...
Isn't that, I mean, that's so strange to be like, oh yes, this is this famous metal band, and then it's be like, yeah, what song do they play? I don't know. I don't know the name of the band. That's a level of fame that transcends even just their music.
Well, Breaking the Law. You watched Beavis and Butthead. You at least know Breaking the Law. Breaking the law.
Yes, I know it by them
exactly.
by them singing it.
The best friend of metal bands everywhere, Beavis and Butthead.
So, Michael, what is your final?
My last one. Listen, he's been making music since 1983. Making me laugh since 1984. Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Why isn't Weird Al in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I got no answer for that one.
Come on. He has been proficient at mocking all of these clowns since his first release.
Is there anybody else who takes kind of I think of like, I don't know. There's
Alan Sherman?
Yeah, Alan Sherman. Well, are there other acts that...
The original Spike Jones?
Well, like Fountains of Wayne or what's their heads? Weezer have kind of a satirical kind of bent.
Yeah, they've turned into, I don't know.
Why aren't the Ruddles in the Rock and
Why
Roll
aren't the
Hall of
Ruddles?
But I think he's probably in the accordion Hall of Fame, or at least the polka Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Him and Frankie Yankovic. They just have a Y wing and then the rest of them.
You think that's the response to him that he gets? Like, listen, you're probably in some kind of silly accordion Hall of Fame.
You're Dr. Demento! Hall of Fame!
I don't know. He operates in such a very distinct cloud of his own Weird Al-ness. And maybe that's because he does a lot of parody songs and he doesn't write necessarily that music himself. Maybe that's why.
You think?
What makes you think he should be? Is because he's a gadfly he's kind of the satirist that takes entertainment down a peg or something?
I think he is one of those.
He's punk in a way.
I always think of? I think it was Nirvana, who was like, they're like, how we knew we made it.
Yeah, okay.
Is when Weird Al lampooned our song. And I think he represents a certain...
He's a barometer for what's popular right now.
That is, yes. And he kind of has been for 30 years.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe this is a stupid choice, and he's never going to go in. And, like, I think that induction ceremony would be Dr. Demento standing up there like introducing him, right?
Maybe or Rivers Cuomo.
If there was
best friend.
if there was this scientific technical version of the Hall of Fame where they inducted the nerds that that did important things, but we're not going to put them in prime time.
For developments in that little P guard, that pop guard, that goes in front of the microphones, we have.
In the sound check category.
Roadie.
Where's the
The
roadie?
roadie.
I don't know. I thought of this and I was like, oh, this is a stupid pick.
Yes.
Yes, we all agree on that. But
New Order is one of those bands. Depeche Mode, another band.
Joy Division.
Yeah, you know what? I think New Order is more deserving than Joy Division.
I think that's the influential versus. It's almost like the Smiths versus Cure argument.
Yeah. Because Joy Division, I think that they've wrote the best song
Sure.
that has ever been written in terms of rock and roll. I think Love Will Tear Us Apart is the best song that has ever been written.
I don't know if it's the best, but it's kind of a perfect song.
Yes, perfect is a good way. But like New Order is just like a better band and better musicians.
On the Snubs list, it's funny that Big Star, which is like the rock
nerd.
Darlings
critic band.
and Replacements, and King Crimson, which are all like super rock nerd kind of bands.
I'm as big of a Big Star fan as you'll find.
Yeah.
I waffle on them. I'd love to see them in. I certainly wouldn't be against it, but I can see why they're not in.
Yeah.
I mean, the ultimate cult band.
So what is so this year is what 25 years from this year to 1994.
Yeah.
What were big 94 albums that came out? We're giving Jeff time to make his decision.
Blatantly stalling.
Jeff is just
No, I'm just gonna pull some shit out of my. Oh, okay.
Weezer came out, their first album. Are they a Hall of Fame?
Let's see. Biggest hit singles of 1994. Top 10 best albums of the year. Jeff Buckley's Grace.
Was that his first album?
That's the only one. You said Weezer.
He did.
You said Weezer. Oasis is definitely a maybe.
Yeah.
Which I know they're eligible. I think it's next year.
Okay.
So I would be very disappointed if they didn't.
Yeah.
I think
make it.
They'll make it just for the big kick-ass fight they'll have at the induction on stage.
Oh, sure. They haven't had a real good controversy. like one of those like Van Halen type deals in a while.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Who's the lead singer? Is it Liam or Noel?
I never know. I think it's Noel.
Noel. Liam's the older brother.
Is Noel gonna make Liam induct him?
Yeah.
Like just really. Oasis is a good one.
Yeah, they should definitely be in. How about How about Portishead? No.
Okay, let's go with 9 Inch Nails.
All right.
Kabing! I think because she's the only female solo artist on here, and we don't want to be a sausage fest. Bjork. And I'm a huge Smiths fan, so you just kind of won my heart there. And then I do think the problem with some of these genres that are kind of outside the pop mainstream is that a lot of voters can't even discern them from each other. But for acknowledging the influence that Judas Priest had on the genre of metal, heavy that is, pick that one. So right on, guys. Oh my God, guys! I got this envelope in the mail. Oh, it's like from the Podcast Hall of Fame election committee.
Insert wrestling.
Oh my God!
Noises that I found for free online. Let's see.
Oh, they're asking if we could set up some microphones to record. Oh, I thought we were gonna.
Well,
We
hey,
just
I'll
recorded.
take it.
That's okay.
We're in the big time.
We're
now,
in the big time,
boys.
guys. This has been the Mount Rushmore of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Snubs. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.
Bye.